Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Zach Wollert'z. I teach ceramics at Kirkwood Community College in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And this demonstration will go over how to build a lidded container from slab built construction. So for students in my class, feel free to take notes as you follow along through the demonstration here, and that'll help you put together this assignment. So here's an example of what we're going to be building today. So slab construction with the top will have a flange on it, and we'll use the carving blocks to press our patterns into the clay. Right, and we'll keep this over on the side so we can use that as an example. So for beginning, we'll take out our tools. Our canvas. I took time before and wiped the canvas down, so if it's dirty from previous use, wipe your canvas down so you don't have clay mixing with the clay that you'll be using to build this. Okay? So unwrapping our clay block, and for the size, what we want to grab both of our slats. Right, we have our plywood slats that are at a 3/4 inch, and then our masonite slats that are at a 1/4 inch. So for the height of the slab that we're going to roll out, we want to line up both of our slats and cut that slab. Right. And the slab doesn't have to be an even cut. Right. We'll be rolling this out, so even if it's uneven, it'll roll out nice and even in the long run. Right? And then we can remove our plywood, put that back because we're not going to need that, and then we'll peel off that lovely slab of clay. Now, if I did this correctly, we're not going to need our clay for the rest of the demonstration. So we can set that off to the side here and roll this out. So I always want to have the longest side of the clay cut, right? Because I want to have the most amount of clay slab that I can use for the assignment. So what we're going to do is roll out our clay slab so that we have a width of 2 sides of our carved blocks here, right? So if we're looking at our demonstration piece right here, I have a pattern on one side, right? One full length of the block here, and then the other side here, I have the pattern side. So this is the other width that we want to account for, right? So let's begin rolling. So with the dowel rod, just kind of like rolling out cookie dough, right? And every time I roll, I press the clay into the canvas, it will stick. So I always want to release it, like pull up that slab. And I can go back over and take a look at my width, and I'll want to roll one more time. So adding pressure as I go will lighten up, right? I'll add more pressure first, and then as the slab gets more thin, I'll lighten up on my pressure because I don't want to stretch things out too far because then I won't have my height. Right now we're just doing our width. So this is great. I've got 2 full widths of my block for pressing, and then I'll rotate the slab and we will get our height. Right. So again, rolling out our slab, flipping, and it works easy for me to start at the base and roll forward. For others, you can start at the center and roll out that way. But what's going to happen is we'll have a nice even thickness down to our masonite boards here, right? So even if you add a lot of pressure and get your slab really thin on one side and it's really thick on the other, we have our slats in place so we don't roll too thin. It'll just even out nicely. So just continuing on. And if you notice, I'm not flipping my slab anymore because I don't need to. I just need to release it from the canvas so that it rolls and stretches out. And just keep going until it doesn't stretch out anymore. So now I'll come back towards me. I find it helpful changing directions, but if you have nice even pressure, you should have a nice even slab. This will be the last one. Okay, so now that we have our slab, I can put my slats to the side. I can put away my dowel rod and then start to think about what kind of pattern that I want to achieve, right? So what I have here, just to demonstrate, right, I have a central image on bottom and top, and how I press the carving blocks in the slab here. I'll have a central image that runs straight up the center, and then the design patterns will be on the wings. And when you overlap them, it'll be a nice blend, right? So, cornstarch, because this will be our release agent. Right, we don't want the clay to stick into all the nicely carved lines that you spent time on creating, and eyeballing the width here, and then I'll roll and press my design into the slab. Right, so I'll start at the bottom here, and if you have enough pressure correctly, you can just roll once, and you'll have a nice pressed design. Right, if you roll back and forth too many times, you can get that ghost image. I think some of you have found that. Right, so best to do it once. And then I'll line up the sides here and the bottom, and that will continue on, right? Lining up my other side here. And I'm getting pretty good patterns on my pressings. This is a little light over here, so remember, you can always line your block back up along the top edge and the side. If I shake it down, it'll align with the image that was pressed in there with the relief, and I can go back over the area and compress down, right? So I'm getting a little bit of a ghost image here, a double pattern line, but that's fine, right? Just don't do it too much. And then I've decided to take another block and put this on top here. So using my mountainscape, making sure that I have the correct angle, right? I had it upside down, so always double check of when you're pressing your block on your clay, right? This is the water feature of the mountain being reflected in the lake, and then this is the mountain right side up. And then switching with the pattern. Eyeballing is a total appropriate way for measuring, right? We have these really nice straight lines. The block has some really nice straight lines, and as you can see, I'll have a really nice straight line on top and bottom. So from here, what we're gonna do is make sure our bottom has a straight edge that we can roll up on, right? So we'll grab our masonite slat here and cut using our needle tool, because when we roll this up, I want to make sure that the bottom will be flat like this here, right? So if it was jagged, it wouldn't sit right side up, right? It would, be a little off. So we'll also have a little bit of an overlap here. I think the edge is really nice and simple to achieve. So for that, we'll want to pick a side and trim it off, because one side is going to be the overlap, the other side is going to be a straight edge. And with this, I will cut on this side. So my right side is going to be my straight edge. And I'll always save the extra slab pieces just in case, if I feel like I need to have a little bit of an extra bit of clay on the side for an accent piece or a handle on top. So this is the height that we're going to stick with. Coming back to the demonstration piece, you can see I added a little bit more height here using some other texture blocks. And the reason being for that is the lid, right? If I were to add the lid down here, I'd be cutting straight through the heads of Achilles and Ajax here, right? I don't want to do that, right? I want to keep their heads on, so I don't want to interrupt that pattern, that design, and instead we'll be cutting through the top of Mount Hood, which is kind of a funny thing, right? It's a dormant volcano, right? So a little bit of a joke. So let's cut that straight on top. and then we can move our slab off to the side while we are building this, right? And so now we have our slab, and we will use a cardboard tube to roll our slab up and create our cylinder. Right, so gently lift up your slab here, and what I want to do is line up the bottom edge of the slab with the bottom edge of the cardboard tube, and you can gently lift up. Right? So the important thing about lining up the bottoms here, right, so that the clay doesn't get squished when you take it vertical, right? But before we take it vertical, we want to create our overlap here. So this varied edge is going to overlap our straight edge here, right? We'll give it just about an inch of overlap so we can score the line here. And don't be afraid to get some real deep score marks on here, right? I judged it because I've done this a couple times before, right? So you can line up the edges, and then again, just by sight, scoring the area that you need, or you can line up your slabs and draw a line with your needle tool, and then roll back just a little bit. And I know that's going to be my overlap area, so I can go back and carve my score marks. And then again, with eyesight, right, it'll be about an inch. I can draw my line, and that will be my score line for the other side. Right. So use your cardboard tube. It's really helpful to use so you're not hunched over on the other side trying to score. Right. And then I can take a quick look and see how things are lining up. Looks good. Then we'll add our water. So we'll only need to add water to one side here, because that'll flow just fine into the score marks that you carved. And with your tube, we'll gently roll it over, make sure that we don't have anything in the way, and then add pressure, roll it back and forth, compress that line a little bit. And if you did this correctly, it should be enough to tack in, and we can lift up and it will hold in place. So to go vertical, keep your hand on the slab and lift up, right? That'll support what you have here. Then we can take a look over what we have. There's a little bit of impression that we lost. That's okay. Right? These are handmade. We're not a factory. We're not a machine. Right? Having handmade pieces will eventually, have finger marks and things like that. So it's totally acceptable for a project like this, right? Showing the quality of a handmade object. So to make sure that our slab is compressed and fully attached, I'll add my hand onto the top of this cylinder and nuzzle it up to the seam and then roll my hand over those overlapped slabs. Right? And if you really want to take it a step further, you can take your slab and press into it, and it might give you a little bit more of a texture, right? So I'll leave that up for you to decide. So fun thing about the cylinder here, you can shape it into a round cylinder, or you can let gravity do the work and you'll have an oblong cylinder like the demonstrated piece right here. So I like a little bit of an oblong shape to it. I think it frames the images a little nicer. So using our cardboard tube rested up against to the side, I'm lining it up with the line of the press blocks. And I'll support the side here. I'll lift up and press down a little bit, and then do the same to the other side so it's even. And support that side, lift it up and back down. Right, and that frames the seam really nicely on the central facing of the back, and then the front you have a nice central facing of those images. Right, so now we're gonna create our bases. So when you're moving your cylinder around, you want to be really careful, right? You know, if I were to squeeze this really tightly, it'll just kind of crumple. So taking your cylinder, placing it on the slab, we'll trace out the bottom. All right, so trace out the bottom first. Don't just go straight in and cut it. I find it's easier to cut after tracing, right? And clay is pretty forgiving, right? So if you're not exact, that's okay. We can always squish the clay a little bit to fill the gap or take away the clay. And now we're going to score the bottom and then match it up with the cylinder, which can be a little nerve-wracking, right? So just take your time when you're applying these together. So what we're going to do is flip this one, right? So gentle touch. Take a deep breath and flip your bottom. Because now this will make it easier for me to score, right? If you didn't score the bottom here, there's the potential for the bottom to just release during firing. Adding my water just to one side will be fine. And if you noticed, I accounted for that overlap here, which is a really great key to line things up. So I can use this mark here to align with overlap on the side here, so I know where my bottom will line up. And it's okay if the bottom edge is a little rough right now, right? You have the leather hard stage to tool your cylinder and make things nice and even. I'm just going over and compressing my base together. Right. Cool. And now we'll do the top. So I'll bring my slab down again. Right, this is why we want to make sure we have enough clay. I'll trace out the top. So you can do a couple different things with the top. As shown in the demonstrated piece here, I have a little bit of an overlap. So with the slab, I'm folding over the slab on the edges of the cylinder here, right? So you can choose to cut off a little bit of extra clay and fold that edge over, or you can trim right along the line that you carved, right? So if I were to have that overlap, I would cut about a 1/2 inch around the whole piece, around the whole top of the slab, but we'll keep it right on the edge here, and we can see the difference between the two. Right, so real rough cut. Right, clay's really forgiving, remember, so not a problem. And what we have also available now is we can press in a texture here and create a nice surface on the top, like as an example of this demonstrated piece using 4 corners of a 4 different designs that I carved out. This one will use the designs that are on the piece, so it'll unite the top with the base, right? So making sure I have my correct designs. I'll just do an even split here. So another way that you can press your block into your clay is just rolling your hand. And it works really well. Case in point, right? And I can align the top and bottom seams of the block. And this also stretches out the clay a little bit. So we'll have a little bit of extra clay around the rim, right? So now we'll flip, and we'll just take a little bit of time, make sure things are lined up. So that'll work really well. And if you noticed, wet clay likes to stick to wet clay, so just be patient. Okay. If you move slowly with like an intention of work, then you'll have more success, right? If you're frenetic, trying to rush things, you'll run into more problems. So scoring our edge, we'll flip. right? Making sure to be gentle, because as you can see, our walls are really wet, they're really thin. We'll score the top here, and we will close our lidded container. Great. So just taking the time, aligning our top, and then we can begin compressing the sides. So this is going to be our top. If you notice, we're having it's sagging a little bit, but not to worry, because once we remove the top, we can press out from the inside like this, and it will create a dome, right? So we want to have that nice rounded lid to fit right on our bottom cylinder, right? So just take your time, compress those score lines together, right? I'm using a real light fingertip pressure. If I swipe the clay, you will remove all of that lovely design work that you pressed into your clay, right? So fingertip rolling pressure, right? Pressing the top down. Great. So now we're ready to remove our top here. Normally, you would let this set up in front of a fan for about 10 to 15 minutes, right? The wet clay will set up to a more leather hard and firm state. But for the sake of the demonstration here, we will carry on. And this is a good test of skill if you just happen to plow through the next steps. But this would be a good break time, right? You know, put this in front of the fan, take a walk down the hallway, right? And let it set up. So using the banding wheel. I'm going to make sure that this is relatively on center, right? It's a little oblong, so you're going to have to adjust for, you know, the width and depth of the piece, right? So we'll grab your needle tool and this measuring block, right? So in using this measuring block, we can use our needle tool and have it at a certain height, right? And turn our banding wheel, and then it'll leave a mark, right? So with it being so narrow, we're just going to have to turn the banding wheel with the measuring stick on top. And so taking a look at height, pattern, design, I have this really nice line on the mountain scape here, right? So there's a tree line here, then there's the beach, and then there's the reflected image. If I can, I'll try and get a height that will work right across that beach line. I think I got it, right? So finagling your piece, take your time with this. All right, the wood might catch. As you can see, it's kind of chattering across the surface. I think that lined up well enough, right? And then we'll switch over to our fettling knife here, right? So I have a little bit of dry clay. I want to make sure that that's cleaned off because that can drag. So with your wet sponge, just make sure your fettling knife is clean, right? And I can see where my line is. So with the steady hand, just take your time. And gently slice through that surface. And this is why you want to make sure that this is your cylinder, your clay, is a little bit more firm. Because with it being wet, I'm pulling, I can distort the image, but if you take your time with it, you'll have a more successful piece, right? You won't distort it that well, or that much, I should say, right? So with cutting through, wet clay likes to stick together, so just be careful in releasing the top, right? So when I'm moving this, I have points of contact on all sides, and I'm gently lifting up. And that's a nice even cut, right? So carefully lay your top down, and I can move this over to the side, right? So now we're going to line up the register, right? So we're going to add in a small bit of slab here as seen on the demonstrated piece here, and that will lock into place on the bottom. So with the lovely bits of slab that we had cut off in the beginning, we'll use these, right? So these are top and bottom cuts, and which will work really well for making that flange on the inside here, right? Because this is about the amount of clay that we'll need. So, and this is a little bit of a brain teaser, right? So take your time with it. And I'm just making sure I have enough clay, and I do, so that's great. Which means I can cut off these ends right here and square up my slab, right? Because I want to have a little bit of an overlap. So grabbing my straight edge, I don't want to have this varied rim. I suppose you could, it would just look a little messy. And then using about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch of that slab, we're going to cut and have our flange. Right, so something like this. And I want to score about half of that, right? So using my rib, my serrated rib, scoring half the amount, right? Because this will connect to my top. And then this will be the part that rests on the bottom here. So what you can do to help out the smoothness is just run your finger along the edge here, and that will make for a better contact. Right. You'll see what I mean in just a second. Now scoring the inside of my piece. You can see how wet this is, right? So just take your time if you're working really wet. You notice I'm supporting the outside with my left hand, because if I was to score without supporting that, it would flare things out just a little bit more than I want to. Great. So we'll line things up now. And we'll add our water, right? Just need to add our water to one side because we'll compress those together just perfectly. All right, so here we go. Our scored edges, I'll start at the seam here on the overlap on the inside. Then compress as I move around. Right, it's kind of like coil pot building, right? I'll add my coil, I'll compress lightly. Oh, well, look at that. I cut off just a little bit more clay than I needed to. That's okay. That's why we keep our slabs, right? Clay is really forgiving. We can blend things together really well. And I have this lovely piece here that I can use, right? So this is one of those moments that I did not plan for, right? But also a good thing to show that clay is really malleable. And sometimes it's not what you can make, it's how you can fix it, right? So we'll cut off an extra bit. So using a little bit more clay than I need, we'll be able to fill in that gap and then blend the clay together, right? So smoothing that edge out. And I'll overlap a little bit on each side here. Wet clay likes to stick to wet clay, so if I compress well enough, it will hold together. Okay. Adding my water. And I'll start with the side that I trimmed. Great. And then from here, I'll make a mark, and then I can cut off the slab, the extra that I don't need. I'm lining up my flange, compressing down in. Nothing to worry about, right? I can blend those lines together. If I have my wood knife, which is right here, I can blend things on the seam and then run this tip around the edge here and smooth out that surface. Again, this is going to be easier on you if you have this at the leather hard stage, right? So it'll be more firm to work with. It'll be less temperamental, and you don't have to be quite so careful with the surface. Okay. So now that we have that, I want to bring in my edge just a little bit. So I'll pinch around the top and just bring this in, right? Because this is going to fit pretty well when I put this together when the top and bottom line up. So it's going to act as like a plug with these sides. Right. Then I can run my wood knife around the bottom edge here, just kind of cleaning things up. And moment of truth. The seams work really well in lining up your edges, right? So it just needs just a little bit more work. I'm going to bring in the edge and the flange into the center just a little bit more. Lids are one of those things that it does take a little bit of time and work to get a really good fitting, right? Like, again, we're not machines. You know, as you can see, the edge on my lid is really varied at the moment. We want to have a nice tight lid, right? So a little bit of extra work. Drop it in. All right. Another thing that you can do to help bring that edge in is running your wood knife around, and that will also compress that clay into center. All sorts of little tricks for this, right? And it also tends to stick just a little bit because wet clay likes to stick together, right? So as you're working with your piece, just be careful not to compress things together too much, right? Because bringing these side by side, right, as things dry, you can wiggle the rim back and forth, and if I press back and forth left and right, we'll have just a little bit of room so the lid can release really nicely. So with this leather hard firmness here, all right, this is the stage that I would prefer working with this demonstrated piece. We'll grab a sponge and some water, and we can clean up that edge here and smooth things out, right? So it makes for a real nice clean line on both sides. And this would, drop in really nicely like that, right? So, demonstrated piece is done. Let's take this guy off for one last touch, right? This is where we want to make the top more domed, right? So if I run my fingers around on the inside, I can stretch this out and not have a sunken lid. Right, so you can see my finger marks working back and forth and blending these together. You can always let it rest on your fist a little bit too to get that dome effect. All right, so take it as far as you want, right? And for a flare, like a little personal flare, if you really wanted to, you could add a lid, like add a lid top, right? We have all this wonderful leftover textured clay, and if I simply folded it over, I could add a little square or something like that on top. So if you do that, let the top set up, right? Because it won't support the weight of this if you were to compress in, right? So there you have it, right? Lidded, slab built container.